Good afternoon, Patriot Smoothie here at the Ottawa Courthouse on day 16 of the trial for Tamara, Lich and Chris Barber. Fun fact, this was originally supposed to be the last day of this trial, but we now know that next week we're going to have the 5 days, Monday to Friday, and after that it's all up in the air. They're talking about possible dates in December, maybe even next year, January and so on. Who knows? It's going to be kind of broken up after next week, I imagine. I don't know for sure, though, because everything I reported about the schedule out the window. So this morning we resumed with Crown Witness Stefan Belfoy. Stefan Belfoy. Sorry about that, folks. Brain fart. And he testified about his son having to walk 1.5 kilometers in full hockey gear and skates because they were on somewhere on Bronson. And there was a traffic jam, as he put it, impassable traffic. And this was all through interpreter services. So impassable traffic. And so they got out of the car. He was looking on his phone GPS. None of the alternative routes along Bronson to his testimony were available. He doesn't remember where he was on Bronson, but somewhere on Bronson, all of the roads around were canceled, closed, blocked. So he gets out and he walks with his family to his house somewhere in the Lyon area. And so he walks 1.5 kilometers. His son is in his full hockey uniform, and he's getting made fun of by protesters, according to his testimony. People are making fun of him, mocking them. He said also when he would go out in his mask, people would mock him for wearing a mask. He also said that he would hear fireworks, at least 8 to 10 times fireworks. Doesn't remember on which dates. He described again constant honking, and he was asked specifically about the February 7th injunction for the honking. He said it got a bit sporadic after that, but doesn't remember exactly. So circling back with that incident, it was interesting because Magus on cross-examination asked him about that. He said that because of the pandemic, the hockey organization was requiring that the children come prepared in their entire hockey uniform. And Magus asked him, so you didn't have any boots in the car? There was a bit of back and forth, like you didn't bring boots for him in the car. He said, no, I could, but I didn't, or I wasn't, whatever. So she said, well, if you broke down on the highway, then you wouldn't, how would you get out? Like he'd be in his skates. He said, well, I would ask someone for help. That was an interesting back and forth. Then there was an extended discussion between Magus and Belfoy about Lyon, Slater, and Laurier, whether they're parallel or perpendicular, about some building, about this, that, or the other thing. There was a picture that Magus showed him of Lyon and the trucks, and he said, this is she says it's a police drone capture thing from February 4th, and she says, would you agree that this represents the trucks on Lyon on and around February 4th? And he says, I lived around the corner, that's not my area, there was much more trucks at Laurier and whatever. He was like, just anyway. So that was the end of Stefan Belfoy. I don't believe there was any questions from Tamara Lich for him. There might have been. I'm not too sure at this point, but the next witness was a bit more, stands out a bit more. It's Miss Brio. I believe her name is Chantel Brio, and she runs a upscale clothing store in the Byward Market, according to her own words. And she said her business was impacted, that she had problems with shipments and deliveries. There was a confusion between the understanding of the word shipment and deliveries. The Crown had that confusion. You can go follow my coverage to see the back and forth about that later on. But she testified that she had some luxury collection shipments coming in that were delayed by the protest activities, but not canceled. 4 shipments, but she lost some selling time, as she put it. And she said that she would not go out. She would come to the Byward Market. She works physically at her store for 25 years, also has an online business component. She would go to her store every day, park at the parking lot, and walk to there, and she wouldn't take any other walks because she didn't feel safe. She said she heard constant horns, constant music, constant this. She said she saw lots of flags, lots of upside down flags, lots of F. Trudeau flags. She said that people would come into her doorway of her storefront, and sometimes she would ask them to move, and that if they, Chris is making a face, she would ask them to move, and if some of them would move without saying anything, and some of them would swear at her. She specified later that a woman who told her very colorful language, according to her testimony, was a woman. But no violence testimony or anything like that, but constant horns, the odor of the idling trucks coming in. And she commented specifically that there was a lot more smoking at the time. Apparently, the city of Ottawa was full of much more smoke, cigarette smoke, and weed smoke that she testified about. So that's very interesting, I think. Very interesting testifying about that. She was asked about the injunction. I've noticed on all cross-examinations, they asked about the February 7th date because they all described constant blaring of horns, constant honking. So the defense asks on cross, like, did the horns get sporadic after the 7th? And then they'll be like, oh, I don't recall, or maybe it did, but the constant noise, music, whatever, fireworks, drums, apparently, remember yesterday. And that's where we're at with this. Flags around. And then she also used interesting language to describe it. She said the so-called Freedom Convoy, and at another point said so-called protesters. She said the so-called protesters were going around causing a ruckus, basically. The so-called protesters. So, interesting language there. So-called protesters. They were protesters. They were protesters. We can at least agree on that. They were protesters. So-called. Oh, man.
A protester is a protester is a protester.
Thank you, Justin Trudeau. A protester is a protester is a protester. So that was the most interesting point. We did have on cross-examination, we had someone stand up for Tamara Lich. It wasn't Granger or Greenspan. It was the third person who sits with them at the bench, but I don't know her name. So she did the cross for them, and the straightforward questions, this, that, and the other thing. We also learned that, like some of the previous witnesses, Miss Rio is involved in the class action lawsuit, and she's taken steps to participate. So that's as far as they elaborate. And then at one point she was confused. She's like, well, which class action lawsuit? And then I think it was Eunice who elaborated on this for Barber, because remember, there's 2 defense teams for both one for each co-accused. Tamara Lich has her team, and Chris Barber have their team. They kind of work together, but they do have their separate defense counsel. And so on Barber's cross-examination, Eunice, I believe, asked, about this. And she's like, well, I don't know exactly which class action you're talking about. She's like, well, the $300 million one with Paul Champ and Associates. So that was interesting. I'm sure I missed a lot, guys. If you want the gritty details, go follow me on Twitter, X, Patriot Smoothie on there. You can find me at x.com/rightblend, I believe, is my Twitter handle. You'll find me. Just search Patriot Smoothie. And then we had the third witness, OC Transpo witness, which I never thought was going to happen. I thought we weren't going to see from OC Transpo, but apparently everything I say is wrong. So we got Chantel Huneau, I believe it was?
Natalie
Huneau. I've asked Chris to remember that one detail because there's a lot of things I have to talk about.
Nailed it.
And she's testifying, Chantel Huneau is testifying on behalf of OC Transpo about the cancellation of routes. She talked about just that. Which routes were affected, how service was affected, which area it was affected in. Basically, it was the area of the so-called red zone that was established by the city. All the routes running through that were affected, and some of the routes that just crossed over. She talked about some of the decisions in they have a lot of technical jargon that they use, but like canceling service or altering service, whether it was a full cancellation or a partial cancellation or whatever. There's different definitions for that, but basically boiled down to the 5, the 6, the 7, the 11, and the 14, I believe, were the 5 routes majorly effective. And she was adding towards the break there. There was 2 other partially affected, and over 150 stops. So major. What was admitted by the defense, major impacts to enjoyment of property in the emissions 2 argument, including to transit services. But the OC Transpo did testify that they didn't testify the reasons as to why that was the case yet. They said road closures or places where they would the road would terminate where they couldn't properly turn a bus because of the different turning radiuses of buses and mini buses. So that's the testimony we're getting from Miss so far. She's high up in the OC Transpo organization. And it was fairly dry testimony compared to the other 2 that we heard from today. But I'm sure it will be interesting nonetheless. And I find that her testimony is very impartial and objective, sticking to the facts and not speculating very much about things. She's speaking very dryly about the matter as a matter of fact. Like, okay, these routes in this area on these streets were affected. When asked about reasons, she said road closures or different things. She didn't elaborate hysterically or anything like that. From Ottawa, I'm Patriot Smoothie. I'll see you this evening for the final update of the day.